And over the past 60 years, since 1964, when China and France established this formal diplomatic ties, the relationship has been, at least from the Chinese side, at the forefront of China's relationship with Western countries. In a written statement, Chinese President Xi Jinping stressed China will open even wider to the world and deepen cooperation with France and other countries. So how important is it to France, to European Union, or to the world, opening China is?
It's very important. It's very important because China is now one of the major economies of this world. If China goes well, the world goes well, and if China has problems, the world has problems. So, in a way, we are all highly dependent on the health of the Chinese economy. We, on the European side, would like China to open more so that China's consumption, notably in the area of services, can grow, thus rebalancing what we Europeans and French see as a structural imbalance in the Chinese economy with underconsumption and overinvestment, which we believe leads to overcapacities that then create a problem with the export side. So the more China opens, the more this will grow domestic consumption in China. And we believe that this is good for us, of course, but we also believe that this is good for China, although it's for China to decide what is good for China.
France is the third largest trading partner of China within the EU, and China is the largest trading partner of France in Asia. So, how important they are to each other in terms of trade and investment, Mr. Lamy?
They are, as I said already, they are very important. EU is a larger market than China. Not that the Chinese are not much more many than Europeans, but Europeans are still not richer than Chinese. So if you compare the size of the economies, which is a multiplication between the population and the wealth of the population, we, together with the US, remain the three big elephants in the world economy. So what happens to China, what happens to the US, what happens to the EU, inevitably, and that's in my view a good thing, because I believe globalization is more positive than negative, and I know not everybody agrees with this, but what happens within this triangle as far as geoeconomics is concerned is very important. Now, we know that US is trying to decouple from China for a variety of reasons. We Europeans recognize that there may be some de-risking to do, but we do not believe in decoupling. And this is where there is a difference between EU and the US. We recognize, and I know full well because I speak very often with my Chinese friends, that many of them see the EU as an American poodle. I know that this is the perception in some of the Chinese quarters. It is not the case. We have many things in common in political terms, in value terms with the US. We are not as obsessed with China becoming a major world power as the US are. They may have their own reasons. We have our own stance. We believe there is a corridor of cooperation between EU and China, which must be exploited more. And this is obviously true for France, especially in areas which are environment related. Climate warming is an issue where both EU and China see a more necessary action than, for instance, in the case of the US, especially if Mr. Trump was to be re-elected. Biodiversity, the role of oceans, the importance of poles, of the cryosphere, are areas where we see much more eye to eye and where we believe there are areas of scientific, tech, and economic relationships.
Mm-hmm. You earlier mentioned globalization and U.S. decoupling from China. And there's a geopolitical consideration, but at the same time, I think people would say we are fortunate. We still have rules to follow. For example, the World Trade Organization. China filed a lawsuit over the U.S. IRA, Inflation Reduction Act. As far as I know, the European Union also has its own concern about this act in Washington because it's basically a practice of industrial policy or protectionism, whatever you can say. So two questions, on one hand, how concerned is EU with the IRA in the US? And then how will the WTO resolve the disputes, say, between China and the US now?
Now, I will give you my own personal view. The IRA, which is this huge US subsidy program to hasten the green transition in the US, which was decided by the administration of Mr. Biden, in some respects goes against the rules of the World Trade Organization. And the very specific point where it goes against the rules of the World Trade Organization is where some subsidies are conditioned on local content production. So an electric car produced in the US will be subsidized. An electric car produced elsewhere will not or will be less subsidized. This goes against the rules of the World Trade Organization. China started a litigation against the US. EU did not. I have said from the beginning that I personally regret that the EU did not start a litigation against the US. China, in my view, is right in believing that part of the IRA program is WTO non-compliant, hence is right, like it's right in the WTO to take the US to the litigation part of the WTO on this issue.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mr. Lamy, do you think this idea of a strategic autonomy for Europe is a consensus of every country of the, let's say, elites in different countries in the European Union now?
I would say that the French have always been ahead of the herd as far as strategic autonomy, independence, sovereignty is concerned. So Mr. Macron and the French leadership have always seen the European integration process as something which was to create a political entity that would be more autonomous. So on the one side, the French are ahead. On the other side, if you compare the situation to what it was 10 years ago, it's totally different. Because of what Trump did and because of what Putin did, you now have a much larger number of countries and people and public opinion in the European Union that support this notion that EU should have its own stance and its own strength, including military-wise. And I personally believe that in the years to come, EU will integrate militarily whether it's a European pillar of NATO or whether it's another option remains to be seen. But I think this is now not just a French view or even a French dream. It is happening, and it is happening because of what the US and what Russia have been doing in recent years.
Thank you, Mr. Lamy. Thank you for speaking with us.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
With that, we come to the end for today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.